You see, beloved, in our promotion, teaching, and sharing of black consciousness, we must have a vision, a mission, aims, goals, and objectives to completely cover the full span of challenges within our community so that we can remove those obstacles that are preventing us from acquiring the success and productivity and achievements and accomplishments that are needed. And so a torch or a baton has to be passed on to the next generation of the children so that they can get even further than we would have ever gotten in our lifetimes. And Black Studies is a complete teaching that provides those opportunities, giving the academic foundation that is required for us to acquire the kind of knowledge that is necessary. So the Black agenda entails the imparting of knowledge as opposed to the restricting of relevant truths and the social development of motivation of a younger generation instead of the traditional discouragement and alienation that has been characteristic of common learning systems. So the Black agenda has its vision, which is the facilitating of the development of an enlightened and educated African population with knowledge of self and an appreciation of their heritage and history. The mission of the Black Agenda Project is, metaphorically speaking, the resurrection of the mentally dead Black people who are in need of knowledge of self and general upliftment. The aims of the Black Agenda Project are to familiarize persons with basic Black history, philosophy, psychology, and sociology, to establish a Black empowerment knowledge base within our communities, and to organize by forming and joining effective and efficient organizations and movements with the intention of improving the standard of living and quality of life of our people and creating peaceful and productive communities within our residential spaces. It's more than just learning moments of history in the past. So we also have goals, which include human development, effective communication skills imparted within our young people, empowerment through ownership in particular of land, unity of our people in spite of our differences, respect for all women, and elimination of all forms of racism. And the objectives of the Black Agenda Project are 5, education, land ownership, business entrepreneurship, family reorganization, and the mastery of modern technology. But starting with education, we recognize that the education system must impart knowledge, inspire, motivate, and uplift. Our curriculum has largely only imparted knowledge without inspiring or motivating. It is unacceptable for so many African people to be in prison and so little of us in university in comparison. Education must be both mental and spiritual, as well as cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. Most agree on spirituality, but disagree on religion. So why are we still teaching religious education then instead of universal spiritual truths? We also have the objective of land ownership, a consciousness that must be instilled within our children. It is unacceptable for us to be mainly renters and not owners, mainly tenants and not landlords, and that so many of our people still do not own the land that they live on or the houses that they live in. But that could only change with a change of the frame of mind among those who consider it to be acceptable to not be in possession of where we live. Business entrepreneurship, the third objective. It is unacceptable for Black people to be mainly customers and not merchants, buyers and not sellers, borrowers and not lenders. We must unite and pool our resources, practice cooperative economics, and create skills banks and think tanks to rescue ourselves out of a negative economic situation. But another key component of what is required for our general upliftment is family reorganization. The extended family must once again be considered a viable option for community stability. The roles and responsibilities of each family member must also be revisited, including the children, while the men in particular must rededicate themselves to family life. And 5, the mastery of modern technology. Herein lies the link to future success in education, business, trade and commerce, networking, and communication. Our youth cannot afford to not be competent and qualified in computer science and all of its related areas. And with these key objectives of education, land ownership, business entrepreneurship, family reorganization, and the mastery of modern technology, we set our youth on a pathway to get much further ahead than we would have been. So we promote Black studies. And one of the oldest questions that have been asked to me was, well, Brother David, you're talking about Black studies. How would you feel if someone were to come and promote white studies? And I've been saying the same response all the time. When asking me, well, what about Black studies? How would you feel if there were white studies? Well, the response to that is there already is white studies. And that is what you have learned in the schools. It has been white studies on our educational curriculum that taught us that Christopher Columbus discovered the so-called New World. It has been white studies that have totally disregarded the presence and existence of an indigenous people who had a much higher, more peaceful civilization than the Europeans who came and committed genocide against them. It has been white studies to delete out of the general standard history curriculum the magnificent achievements and accomplishments of African people coming out of the motherland while the Europeans were still in caves, on the hills and cave sides of Europe, eating their meat raw, eating the barks of trees, crawling around on their all fours. It was white studies in particular that stole an academic legacy from Africa and put Europeans' names on it. It was white studies from 640 to 322 BC, according to George J.M. James in his great book, Stolen Legacy, that Greek and other European students went into Africa to study at the Metuneta. They went in as students and came out as scholars and rewrote all of the textbooks with titles such as Newton's Laws of Motion and Einstein's Theory and Charles and Boyle's scientific and chemical formulas and mathematics, Pythagoras' theorem and the philosophy of Socrates and Aristotle and Plato. All of that was white studies because it all came out of Africa while Europe was still uncivilized. So don't ask me, what about Black studies? How would I feel if there were white studies? We've learned white studies already. We've got passes in white studies. We did CXC and GCE that was based on white studies. So don't get in the way now that we're talking about Black liberation. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that the black man must do for self or suffer the consequences. We have to accept our own and be ourselves and abandon the self-hatred that has been plaguing us and causing us to be at each other's throats, living in a crabs in a barrel kind of situation. The great Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey of Jamaica said, Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. But he also said a people without a knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. And we say, if we do not properly document our history, then we will run the risk of having that history rewritten for us by someone else. And they will do it in their own image and interest, as they have done with white studies. So the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, on July 17th, 1988, delivered an address entitled The Black Agenda. And it was on that theme that we established this organization in Trinidad and Tobago, rooted all across the Caribbean region. Minister Farrakhan said in this presentation in Atlanta, the purpose of a black agenda is to set forth what must be done by and on behalf of the descendants of African slaves who are entitled to know the intention and capacity of the state under which we are citizens. Something must be done about our state of affairs as we examine the resources of the nation within which we live and whether commitments will be made to correct our condition. We have to calculate, based on history, what will be done for our development, and if there is unwillingness, then we must have a black agenda that we must act on. This speech by Minister Louis Farrakhan was actually studied and made into a document by two young men from West Africa and the Gambia who went into politics and became the president and vice president of that nation back in the 1990s. There must be a solution, Minister Farrakhan says, to the 400-year-old problem of black people who were once enslaved. We desire to make it known that we will no longer permit the election or appointment of elected government officials whom we favor to be deemed as the same as liberation itself. As Kwame Ture said in his book, Black Power, black visibility in political office is not black power, because sometimes you see the black face, but it's representing white interests. And in the book Black Power by Kwame Ture, chapter 2 is entitled Black Power, but chapter 1 is entitled White Power. And in chapter 1, Kwame Ture explains that there can be no white power in the black community unless you have politicians with black faces who represent the power-broking interests of the whites, as you see even in our own Caribbean social structure when it comes to politics. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan continues, our history, presence, and condition mandates recognition and a response by government to our expressed wants and needs. We do not seek to impose a black agenda on the entire country. However, we refuse to be caught within the frame of any other ethnic agenda imposed on us. And in this speech by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he laid out that we must identify our needs within a black agenda. These include freedom, justice, and equality. 1, a full and complete freedom without restrictions or limitations. 2, justice for all, regardless of creed, class, or color, because as Muslims, even if we're speaking to an enemy or an opponent, we still declare that the same justice that we want for ourselves is the same justice that we want for you, because the Holy Quran teaches that even if you hate someone, even if you do, that should not prevent you from standing up for justice for that person. And then equality under the law and equality of opportunity. And these 3 needs are the essentials of life: freedom, justice, and equality. And they will bring about stability in any society. So Minister Farrakhan goes on to say, we have passed many good laws through the civil rights movement, but the federal government returns power from the people back to the state through counter legislation. Therefore, we must form a united front to ensure that we receive justice through the system. And after giving 400 years of free slave labor, the black community, through a black agenda, must receive reparations from the state. And we demand reparations due to wages that were kept back by fraud through forced servitude. Now, this is the Black Agenda 1988 by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the inspiration for the work that we're doing in Trinidad and Tobago today, where we acquired 3/4 of an acre of land from the state, and we constructed with our own hands, with no government or corporate support, a 6,000 square foot building and education center that we named in honor of Kwame Ture, the Kwame Ture Education Center, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad Masjid. Caribbeans, organizations must network together while we network with organizations in Africa. Remember, September the 7th, 2021 was the first ever Africa CARICOM Summit, where for the first time in history, heads of government in Africa met together with heads of government of the Caribbean virtually online and established that September the 7th will be Africa CARICOM Day. But I'm putting it to us that in the same way the heads of Caribbean governments already came together to draft the reparations plan. But many of those governments have been replaced now then we must ensure that this is a grassroots movement, that the people keep that flame burning. So we intend to commemorate September the 7th from 2022 go forward to bring together our people on the grassroots level. So the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan concludes saying cutbacks on grants to higher education for black people is part of the trend of oppression as an onslaught on the black community, as we saw happening with GATE funding. Once we are not the recipients of justice, we must not be forced to pay taxes, as it is representation that justifies the deduction of sums of money from our earnings. We cannot live without freedom, justice, and equality. So the Black Agenda Project organization is structured after an organization established entitled the Millions More Movement, where Minister Farrakhan, for the 10th anniversary of the Million Man March, which was held on October the 15th, 2005, established the 9 ministries. 1, Health and Human Services. 2, Agriculture. 3, Education. 4, Security and Defense. 5, Arts and Culture. 6, Business, Trade and Commerce. 7, Justice. 8, Information. And 9, Science and Technology. And so the Black Agenda Project has 9 committees that would meet together simultaneously around 9 different tables. Then we will come together and pool our ideas based on the inspiration of the vision, the mission, the aims, the goals, and the objectives of our unity. So the Black Panthers once said, we don't fight racism with racism, but we fight racism with solidarity. We don't have to stoop to the low level of our oppressors and our enemies. As the book of Proverbs in the Bible says, envy not the oppressor and choose none of his ways. And Allah in the Holy Quran says, repel evil with good. In other words, we don't believe in that idea of fighting fire with fire, but we believe in the triumph and victory of good over evil, because it's in the nature of how we were created as black people. So in establishing the Kwame Ture Educational Center, where we're providing free lessons in the GCE or O-level or CSEC subjects, it is that foundation from there in education that we must continue to pursue our own justice. We cannot sit back and wait for the benevolence of our old enemies to feel sorry for what they have done. That day will never come. So on March 11th, 2014, all 15 heads of government of CARICOM came together in St. Vincent and the Grenadines under the auspices of Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves and unanimously agreed to the 10-point plan of action for reparations, which was 1, a full, formal apology so that we can hold you properly accountable and stop you from trying to dodge and duck your culpability and guilt in what you have done to African people. 2, repatriation, or going back to Africa or relocating for those who wish it, because we were forced out of here, so you should facilitate our return for those who desire it. But 3, the establishment of an indigenous peoples program. 4, the establishment of cultural institutions. 5, dealing with the African public health crisis. 6, 7, and 8 are psychological rehabilitation, the African Knowledge Program, and illiteracy eradication. 9 is the transfer of technology, and 10 is debt cancellation. You stole so much wealth from Africa, made your countries rich, and then we are cajoled into taking loans from the IMF and the World Bank, and we have to pay you back? And you never returned what you stole? No. Part of the reparations program must also be debt cancellation, because these were the worst crimes ever committed in all the annals of human history. And if anything ever done is completely unforgivable, apart from shirk or ascribing a partner with God, it is this, the African Holocaust. And the African Holocaust, or enslavement, was the worst crime against humanity for 4 main reasons. One, the amount of lives that were victims of genocide, close to 100 million. Two, the duration of time that this took place, a span of over 300 years. Three, the psychological and social damage that was done to a people as a result of what happened back then that we're still suffering the after effects of today. And four, in particular, the destruction of the black family, where you're still seeing those patterns of destruction today. In so many of our fathers abandoning their children, and the family structure unstable, and our children growing up as orphans. Because from an Islamic point of view, there's a completely different concept on what an orphan is. As far as the West is concerned, an orphan is a child without parents. But from the point of view in Islam, an orphan is a child without a father. And we have so many fatherless young men who are now vulnerable and susceptible to the influence and allure of a gang leader who becomes the father figure as a mentor. All of these are problems that must be solved. So there must be a new approach to the teaching of the education of our children. So, beloved,